In the United States, the nation has been torn apart by civil war. Texas and California have seceded to form the Western Forces, WF, militia, while Florida has established its own alliance. The federal government, led by a controversial president serving an unprecedented third term, is engaged in a fierce battle against these secessionist factions. Despite the president's frequent appearances on television, where he vows that victory is imminent due to the unwavering defense of loyalist states, the public has grown increasingly skeptical. Many believe it's only a matter of time before the Western forces reach Washington, D.C. War photographer Lee sits in her New York hotel room, watching the president's latest speech on television. As she captures an image of the broadcast, her attention is suddenly diverted to the sound of explosions outside. She peers out the window to see a bombing unfolding in the heart of the city. The following day, Lee teams up with her colleague, journalist Joel, to cover a protest in downtown New York. The city is on edge, with desperate citizens rallying for access to basic necessities like water. As they prepare to enter the chaotic scene, they are handed fluorescent vests to identify them as press. Lee quickly immerses herself in the crowd, snapping photos as tensions escalate. When the police attempt to disperse the protesters, a violent clash ensues. Amidst the turmoil, Lee continues to document the unfolding violence, undeterred by the danger around her. However, a young photographer named Jessie is caught in the chaos and injured. Lee rushes to Jessie's aid, pulling her to safety. Grateful, Jessie reveals that she is an admirer of Lee's work. As a gesture of support, Lee gives Jessie her vest, but her attention is soon drawn to an armed woman running through the crowd with an American flag. Sensing imminent danger, Lee instinctively shields Jessie just as a bomb goes off, decimating the protesters. In the aftermath, Jessie, still reeling from the shock, struggles to regain her composure. Although the explosion has left her temporarily deaf, she forces herself to take a picture of the carnage, determined not to appear weak in front of her idol. Meanwhile, Lee, ever the professional, continues capturing the gruesome scene. Later, back at their hotel, where many journalists have taken refuge, Lee and Joel discuss their next move with their mentor, Sammy. Despite the slow Wi-Fi, Lee persists in uploading her photos. Rumors of a massive harm planned for July 4th circulate, but the trio is uncertain whether to take them seriously. Suddenly, the power cuts out, a common occurrence since the war began. Thankfully, the hotel is equipped with a generator. Sammy soon learns that Lee and Joel plan to drive through war-torn regions to reach Washington, D.C. They are not interested in covering the front lines but are determined to secure an interview with the president, who has not spoken to the press in over a year. It's a risky venture. Journalists have been unalived for merely approaching the White House, but they believe the interview is worth the risk. Sammy, initially skeptical, warns them that their plan is reckless, especially given the dangers along the way. However, he eventually agrees to join them, revealing that he, too, has a vested interest in reaching D.C. However, his primary goal is to report from the front lines in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he needs a ride. Despite concerns about Sammy's age and physical limitations, Lee ultimately consents to bring him along. As they prepare to depart, Lee is surprised to find Jessie waiting for them in the car. This leads to a heated argument with Joel, who accuses Lee of hypocrisy. She's willing to take along an aging Sammy but reluctant to allow a young photographer like Jessie to tag along. Realizing that she has no valid argument left, Lee reluctantly agrees to let Jessie come along, but only on the condition that they drop her off in Charlottesville with Sammy. The group sets off, navigating through desolate roads littered with abandoned vehicles. At a checkpoint, soldiers meticulously inspect their journalist IDs before allowing them to proceed. During the journey, Sammy and Joel discuss potential questions for the president, such as the controversial decisions to disband the FBI and authorize airstrikes on American soil. Eventually, they come across a gas station guarded by 3 armed men. Desperate for fuel, they take the risk of stopping. Initially, the men are unwilling to share, but their stance softens when Lee offers to pay with Canadian currency. While the tank is being filled, Jessie notices something in the distance and decides to investigate, followed by one of the armed men. Concerned for her safety, Lee trails behind them. To Jessie's horror, she discovers 2 men hanging by their wrists, visibly tortured but still alive. The armed man explains that they were looters, and his group has been debating what to do with them for days. One of the men offers Jessie the power to decide, but she freezes in the moment. To divert the man's attention, Lee suggests he pose with the captives and snaps a few photos. As the group resumes their journey, Jessie laments that she didn't take a single picture and questions whether she should have intervened. The others reassure her that this is part of the harsh reality of a journalist's life. It's something she'll have to acclimate to because things are only going to get tougher. Jessie fights back tears but vows to be braver in the future. As they continue their trek through the war-torn landscape, they are subjected to more empty proclamations from the president on the radio, juxtaposed against the devastation that surrounds them. Corpses litter the streets, but something catches Lee's eye, prompting her to ask Joel to pull over. Lee then takes Jessie to a downed helicopter, encouraging her to take some compelling photograph. While Jessie photographs the wreckage, she apologizes for being a burden and shares that her old-style camera once belonged to her father. He's currently holed up on his farm, pretending that the war isn't happening, which deeply frustrates her. Jessie wonders aloud if Lee would photograph her if she were ever hit by a fire weapon, but Lee leaves her to ponder that question on her own. That evening, the group stops to rest. As they watch the distant flashes of fire weapon, Lee reflects on how she used to cover wars as a way of sending warnings back home. Now, the violence is no longer distant, it's right around the corner. She realizes that her growing cynicism about the power of journalism is why she's been so tough on Jessie. Meanwhile, Joel tries to comfort Jessie, telling her it's normal to struggle with sleep after witnessing such horrors and offering his support. That night, they camp out under the open sky, like nomadic travelers in a war zone. The next day, they venture to the area where they saw flashes of fire weapon the night before. Lee and Jessie take numerous photos as two factions exchange fire, with an unfortunate man trapped in the crossfire. A smoke grenade is deployed to offer him some cover, but as soon as he attempts to escape, he's struck by a fire weapon. His comrades drag him to safety, desperately trying to stem the bleeding, but the man succumbs to his injuries as Jessie documents the grim scene with her camera. Afterward, the group follows the soldiers into a building, where they encounter a wounded man pleading for help. Before their eyes, the man is ruthlessly wounded by a fire weapon. Jessie, unable to tear her gaze away, is shaken as the soldiers nonchalantly continue their sweep of the premises. By the end of it all, Joel is laughing with one of the fighters as if it were just another day at work. The soldiers capture a few enemies and line them up for execution, which Jessie captures on film as well. Later, the journalists arrive at a refugee camp. With no available tents, they are forced to sleep in their car. As Jessie develops her photos the old-fashioned way, she bonds further with Lee, who reveals that her own parents are also on a farm, pretending that the chaos isn't real. When Jessie finally examines her pictures, she's disheartened by how poor most of them are. Lee reassures her that this is normal, only 1 out of every 30 photos is truly worth keeping. Jessie eventually discovers a powerful image of the dying man, and Lee praises her work. That night, they find a moment of peace with other refugees before plunging back into the horror the following morning. As the journey continues, Jessie takes more pictures, this time capturing the faces of her friends to add a personal touch. Eventually, they reach a town that seems eerily normal, with people casually strolling the streets as if untouched by the war. They stop at a clothing store, where the clerk explains that the town has chosen to simply ignore the conflict. Jessie persuades Lee to try on a dress, reminding her that even in wartime, there's no harm in indulging in something nice. She playfully teases Lee and snaps a photo of her smiling, a rare sight. Afterward, Lee rejoins Sammy, who points out the armed men stationed on the rooftops. He remarks that the mundane life of the town wouldn't have suited them, it's too dull. Sometime later, the group stumbles upon an abandoned circus with an unalived man lying in the road. Lee uses her camera's zoom to scout the area but sees nothing. Joel decides to proceed, but as they pass under the circus arch, a bullet shatters their window. Reacting quickly, Joel speeds up, driving over the body and pulling over near a truck for cover. There, they discover 2 camouflaged soldiers lying in wait, aiming to take out the life-taker in the nearby house. As the journalists document the standoff, the life-taker fires but misses. Jessie and Lee continue taking photos while Joel attempts to interview the soldiers, curious about which side they and the life-taker are on. It turns out the soldiers aren't affiliated with any faction. They're just 2 guys trying to unalive someone who's trying to unalive them. After a tense wait, the soldiers finally neutralize the life-taker, allowing the group to move on safely. Later, the journalists notice a car speeding up behind them. Fearing being harmed, Lee slows down to let it pass, but the car pulls up alongside them, and a man inside yells, startling them. To their relief, it's only a prank. Tony and Bohai, fellow journalists, and Joel's friends, are behind the wheel. During their stay at the hotel, Joel had drunkenly disclosed their plans to Tony. Tony also reveals that Joel had flirted with Jesse. Overjoyed to see them, Tony climbs through the window to join them in the car, claiming they are more fun. Jesse, intrigued, tries the same stunt and ends up in the other car. Bohai, who seems to prefer Jesse's company, speeds off with her, leaving Lee uneasy. As they lose sight of the other car, a military vehicle suddenly roars past, forcing Lee to veer off the road to avoid a collision. She manages to stop just before hitting a tree. When they get back on the road, they soon find Bohai's car abandoned near a farm, its doors left wide open. Investigating further, they discover that Bohai and Jesse have been captured by loyalist gunmen, who are forcing them to kneel while dumping bodies into a mass grave. Sammy observes that these aren't regular soldiers, they are clearly conducting this operation in secret. Joel, however, believes their press IDs will protect them. Approaching the gunmen cautiously, Lee, Joel, and Tony explain that Bohai and Jesse are fellow journalists, claiming they are simply heading to Charlottesville to cover a story about the reopening of a university. Without a moment's hesitation, the lead gunman pulls the trigger, ending Bohai's life, leaving Jesse in stunned silence and bringing Tony to tears. The gunman then demands to know where they are all from. Lee, Joel, and Jesse nervously mention their home states, but when Tony says he's from Hong Kong, he's fired upon as well. Chaos erupts, and just when it seems all hope is lost, Sammy arrives, driving the car straight into the soldiers, knocking them into the grave they had dug. In the commotion, Jesse accidentally falls in two and has to climb over the gruesome pile of bodies to escape. Joel helps her out, and they all scramble back into the car, ignoring the bullet fired by the surviving gunman as they speed away. As they drive, the tension becomes unbearable. Jesse and Joel both break down, with Jesse even vomiting from the stress. They haven't gone far when Sammy announces he can't continue driving. That's when they realize he's been fired upon. They quickly move him to the back seat, and Joel takes the wheel, racing through a forest engulfed in flames. Their destination is the WF military base in Charlottesville, marked by a flag bearing only 2 stars. Tragically, Sammy succumbs to his injuries before they arrive. Joel's grief turns into a cry of rage as the soldiers at the base place Sammy's body in a makeshift coffin. Lee takes a picture of Sammy's lifeless form but immediately deletes it, unable to bear the sight. Soon after, their journalist contacts inform them that the majority of the loyalists have already surrendered, leaving Washington, D.C., virtually defenseless, save for a few holdouts. With the president's downfall seemingly inevitable, Joel is furious, realizing that Sammy's death might have been in vain. Lee and Jesse find a quiet moment to grieve together, with Jesse admitting that despite the fear, she's never felt more alive than in these past days. Later, as Lee scrubs the blood from the car, the trio resolves to join the WF as they advance on the White House. Even though many loyalists have surrendered, the streets of D.C. are still a battleground. As the WF soldiers launch their assault on the Lincoln Memorial, the journalists follow, capturing every moment. Jesse takes several impactful photos, but Lee suddenly freezes, paralyzed by PTSD. Joel snaps her back to reality just as a tank and helicopter clear the streets ahead, allowing them to move forward. The soldiers spread out to take positions on rooftops, and the journalists take cover behind an armored vehicle to continue documenting the unfolding battle. Out of nowhere, an explosion forces the armored car to lurch forward, leaving the group exposed. They are forced to sprint for safety, with Jessie lagging behind as she continues to snap photos, including one of a man engulfed in flames. She also manages to capture the moment a tank breaches the White House's outer wall. Lee, struggling to keep it together, begins to cry, but Joel urges her to keep moving. Nearby, another journalist and her cameraman are capturing the entire scene. As the chaos intensifies, they notice Secret Service agents rushing the president out of the White House and into a waiting car. 3 vehicles speed off, but the soldiers soon corner them and open fire, unaliving everyone inside. Jessie continues to take pictures, but Lee suspects it's a decoy and pulls her friends into the White House to find the real president. A group of soldiers follows them inside. Within the White House, they encounter more bodies and a few surviving agents. The soldiers begin a thorough sweep, eventually coming across an agent in the conference room who surrenders, offering to negotiate the president's safe passage to a neutral country. However, the soldiers coldly unalive her and press on. More Secret Service agents engage them in the corridors, but the soldiers methodically clear the way, leaving the journalists to document the carnage. In a moment of intense bravery, Jesse stands in the middle of a hallway to get the perfect photograph, only for an enemy soldier to prepare to open fire. Lee instinctively leaps in front of Jesse, taking the bullets meant for her. Jesse, in shock, captures every moment of Lee's death, the horror of it all imprinted in her mind. Afterward, she's frozen in place until Joel snaps her out of it, urging her to continue to the Oval Office. The soldiers have finally cornered the president. Before they can pull the trigger, Joel demands they wait. He needs a quote. The president, desperate, pleads, "Don't let them UN alive me." Satisfied, Joel nods, and the soldiers UN alive the president, marking the end of the war. Jesse's final photograph captures the soldiers standing over the president's body, posing triumphantly as if they had just won a trophy. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more movie insights. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of the film? Which movie should we review next? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.